go ahead and get started. I'll introduce our first speakers. They're going to be talking about alternative fecal coliform and stormwater testing methods. We have Rob Buchert from the City of Pullman, Simon Smith from the University of Idaho, this is very handy, and Shilo Sprouse, also from the City of Pullman. Take it away, guys.
So thanks, Rachel. Again, I'm Rob, and I'm the Stormwater Program Manager at City of Pullman. And I'm just going to run through a quick overview of the project, and I'm going to turn it over to Simon, and who is the principal investigator in this study, and then also the project manager, Shilo Sprouse, with the City of Pullman as well. So, just going to zero everybody in. So we're here in Puyallup, and that is Pullman. Way over there. Who here has not been to Pullman, Washington? Okay, a handful more than I thought, maybe, because all roads do lead to Pullman. and this road led us to Puyallup. Say what? Dirt road. Of course, dirt and gravel. So, the genesis of this project, of this study that we did, it was in December of 2011. The Department of Ecology completed its implementation plan for the fecal coliform bacteria TMDL for the South Fork Palouse River. And at that time, the city was participating, knowing that, the scary TMDL, it was there, it was coming. But then there was this thing started to be talking about Appendix 2 that was going to appear in our next permit. And so we felt very strongly we needed to get a little more involved and start doing some follow-up monitoring, start to pick off some of those implementation items in the implementation plan for the TMDL, one of which was the priority drainage basin, which, again, here's Pullman, and here's all the sites ecology was monitoring. This is the drainage basin, the Stadium Way drainage basin that ecology identified as having some of the highest fecal coliform counts coming down the line. And so we felt it was probably important for us to get a head start on that. But we were a little concerned about the cost involved with a really comprehensive monitoring program, which was being proposed in the TMDL. The TMDL, the implementation plan, really, it seemed like it was very prescriptive for us in Pullman, more so maybe than some of the other ones that we'd seen around the state. And so we were facing large costs, trying to get our hands around this thing, find out where this fecal coliform bacteria, where the contributions were coming from, and lo and behold, in walked Simon, and with a possible solution. Simon was working on some inflow and infiltration studies with our sanitary system, and so we thought, hey, here in Pullman, we are a little bit unique. In Pullman, our storm drains run year-round. We have a lot of groundwater influx. Water does not go in the ground in Pullman, it comes out of the ground. And so that's kind of a challenge for us, especially when we start talking about getting a handle on identifying where these illicit connections are coming from, illicit discharges, that type of thing, because we can't simply go in the summertime and look for water in our pipes or drainage, because they flow pretty much year-round. A good number of them do. And so, so we felt that the I&I study that Simon was pursuing had some application with the stormwater system, switched it over, and boy, were we glad we did, because it seemed like it was a very low-cost, efficient way of finding those illicit connections, those sources of fecal coliform bacteria that we knew were out there, but in a pretty big basin, where do you even start? And grab samples from the manholes or down at the bottom, we're not going to do it. That wasn't going to tell us what we need to know. So, without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to Simon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Rob, for the introduction. I'd like to take you through a little bit of the background to the Pullman study, talk about the strategy and mindset behind this particular investigation, and then we'll look at a fecal coliform data interpretation and talk about alternative test methods. At the end, I'd like to wrap up with 5 simple, straightforward field test methods that you might use. So, the strategy and mindset behind this particular project was that, as Rob mentioned, there is a very prescriptive document that describes what needs to be done and how to do it. And that is quite restrictive. But there did seem to be 2 different components in projects. One is that people need to find where the problems occur in their systems. And the other issue is, once those problems are fixed, they then need to monitor it. And it seems as though only this part of that really needs to fit within the standard methods, the expensive type testing. So the strategy is, if you use any type of technique to tell you where the problems are, you then fix the problem, and then you can monitor it using the more expensive methods. So you can use the cheaper ones up front. The other mindset is that there's no shame in finding illicit connections. They should be there because most of these institutions, most of these buildings would have been built long before the Clean Water Act. So it's not really anything shameful in that respect. So if you're familiar with the Palouse, this is the picture you might have. That's the Palouse in summer. What you don't notice is that that's dry land agriculture. In other words, the soil is accumulating the water when it does rain, and it releases it very slowly, and that's why dry land agriculture is possible out there. That does impact on the hydrology and the characteristics of the system we're looking at. So that's in summer. That would be in winter. Okay, main point is it does snow. That's when the precipitation arrives. The soil freezes, which turns the whole thing into an impervious slab. So very different characteristics. Also, the hydrology is that we have these basalt layers below the soil which prevent the water from penetrating any further, so it stops pretty close to the surface. And that means that we have the year-round flows that most people would use as an indicator of illicit connections. For us, it would be business as usual. So the traditional stormwater methods, the assessment methods, would be to go out, collect samples, and quantify whatever you find. So you've got a range of different tools illustrated there. You've got your sampling poles, temperature monitoring, you've got conductivity, pH, colorimeter, the whole range. That's a snapshot. So if you were to do one manhole a month, you'd be looking at 1 minute of the flow for that month, which is 0.0023%. Not much of a picture. That's a deficiency behind most grab sampling approaches. We did that on the first study. We gathered a lot of information, and then at the end of the first year of assessment, we put all this information together and presented it to the city. The fecal coliform test that was used in this case would be the membrane type filtration method. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it looks a bit like this. You take a sample, it's pulled through a 0.45 micron membrane. The bacteria are trapped on the surface of the membrane, it's placed on a growth medium, and everywhere where you see a colony on that picture, that's counted as a colony forming unit. So that's the traditional method of doing fecal coliform assessments. We had that information for our stormwater system, which looks like what you see here. What we have is two main flows. We have one arm coming down, it's going from east to west, and then there's a second arm which collects from a different region, and they both meet before it discharges into one of the local rivers. So that system was the one where we went out, collected all our grab samples, and this is what the results look like. I'm just going to show you. This is the flow pattern. We've got stuff moving from the start of the system, on the outside of those columns, moving towards the discharge point in the center. And if you have a look at those numbers, they don't make a great deal of sense. What's happening is somebody starts at the beginning of the system and they walk upstream collecting samples. And so if you have a look at just one arm of the system, right at the discharge point, you've got 2,920 colony forming units. Further upstream, you've got a lower number of 2,000 colony forming units. And right at the start, you've got about 200. That seems to say it starts clean and it gets dirtier. But the next, a later period, you'll see a very different pattern. At the discharge point, it's 1,200. Just upstream, it's 300 colony forming units. And right at the start, it's 7,000. So you're getting a mishmash of information here. One of the lessons from our initial studies was that the system changes quickly. As you move upstream, you're actually sampling water that has pulses of contamination that are moving through fairly quickly. And so to get around that, what we had to do was display the data in a different way. If you take those same numbers for each particular manhole, normalize the data. It's a process we can describe later on in question time. Normalize the data and then plot this on normalized axis. What you have is patterns of data distributions. And that pink line there shows it's being fitted there to the red data. What happens when you take data like that mishmash of numbers and put it into this system is that you start to see patterns, you start to see consistent behaviors. And this tells you that actually there is a pattern within the data, that you can extract that pattern after you've got a year's worth of data points, and that you'll see behaviors like this, where it goes from the red data points. What's happening there is, as the water's moving through the system, the contamination is actually diluting. So taking that mishmash of data, putting it on a set of axes like this will allow you to understand a little bit about the processes that are occurring in the system. So the reason that's up there, it's a bit of a jump into the data processing, but the reason that's up there is to emphasize you need a lot of data points to put something together like this. So ideally you want to find a way to get data points quickly and cheaply. The other reason why we wanted to have a look at cheap forms of coliform testing is we wanted quick forms of coliform testing. Under this study, we were committed to a standard methods test, which is performed by a certified lab up in Spokane. So for the studies, we would have to collect samples, get them to the local lab in Moscow, they would refrigerate it, send it through to Spokane the following day. That meant that there was a time window that we could take samples in, and nothing outside that, because otherwise we would miss the deadlines. So what we did in the next studies that we did in Pullman is just use a pour plate method of fecal coliform testing. And if there are microbiologists present, they will be quite familiar with this approach. What you do is, or what you can see on that screen there, is pairs of plates, Petri dishes, the usual size Petri dish, where a sample has been put on a plate, you pour on warm agar, allow it to set, and then incubate it. And you can see quite distinct colonies that have grown on those plates. If you use an agar type, such as McConkey's agar, you're selecting for fecal coliforms, and if you use the appropriate growth conditions, you get quantitative results from your system very quickly and very cheaply. And this is the sort of thing that can be done at home. So the sorts of equipment you'll need would be reasonable balance. You can buy those now for about $35. A couple of basic pieces of labware. You need a pot of McConkey agar. Ideally, you need some way of doing sterile metering of your samples onto your Petri dish. I found that putting 5 mils onto a Petri dish works fine. And then you need to incubate it. That's a Walmart type oven that's been modified with that little control box on the side. Temperature control is absolutely vital with fecal coliform incubation. It's one of the selection methods. If you incubate too low, you're going to get a massive count. If you incubate too high, you're not going to get anything at all. And so precise and accurate temperature control is essential. I'd also recommend using something like an oven as opposed to a smoker, because the smokers, if they malfunction, they can actually set fire to buildings, apparently. So, yeah, this is Mark II, a little safer. If you want to count the plates, a simple approach is to take some LED bulbs, put it on a surface, and then take a translucent bucket and put it on top. And then you can count the plates, you can see them quite clearly. You just count using a hand clicker. So with that sort of apparatus, you can go out and collect as many samples as you want, and then testing for, just a couple of dollars a plate as opposed to tens of dollars. So that's the alternative fecal coliform method. It's suitable for going out and collecting information, large quantities of information pretty quickly. It's not an approved method. So in other words, this would guide you to where the problem areas are, but it's quantitative.
So I mean, in your stay-at-home method or do-it-at-home method, how long is your incubation period?
It's 24 hours.
So 24 hours. Okay, thank you.
And it's a selective medium, a conky, so it does pull out the fecal coliforms and highlight them with a particular color. When you're out in the field, one of the concerns we had to start with was how are we going to purchase one of these flow meters? They seem to be quite expensive. So the initial approach was to build one. This is made out of a couple of sheets of PVC plastic glued together to form a little paddle wheel. On the side of that paddle wheel, you'll see two little dots. Those are magnets. And next to one of the supports, there's one of these little bicycle odometer counters. So as the wheel turns, you get a reading on your bicycle odometer. So you can lower this into the hole, onto the surface of the water, and as the water moves past, it turns the wheel, and you've got an indication to say how quickly the wheel is turning. It's a velocity measurement. So you need, obviously, to get the flow, you need the dimensions of the flow too. If you're going to do something like this, you need to calibrate, and calibrate carefully. So the calibration exercise is what you're looking at here. This is standing next to the launders, the local wastewater treatment plant. Water is flowing in that black space there. But what you can see is a bobbin that's passing by. When you use a video camera to watch that, you can then look at it frame by frame and say, that bobbin took a certain length, so many seconds to go from this point to that point. You know how quickly that water is moving. So if you can then correlate the speed of the water with the number that you get from your bicycle odometer, you now have a calibrated instrument. And that's part of the information you would submit to the Department of Ecology to show, that you actually do have valid numbers. So there's something else that's happened in that last picture, which was we just used a video method to calibrate the device that we take to the field. And so the no-brainer is we'll take the simplest approach. And we're firm believers in the simplest approach after you've exhausted all the other options. So the no-brainer would be to use the video as opposed to anything else. In other words, you take a handful of sawdust, if ecology's here, actually you take a handful of ice and throw it into the water and then video it as it moves. And so if you see those fragments move in your video, you can say it took this long to move that far. And therefore, the water was traveling this fast. And it's that simple. So if you've got a camera phone, you can actually capture information inside and then take that back and analyze it. It takes longer, but it does give you evidence that you can refer to at a later stage. And so you're looking at that frame by frame. This is a photograph taken in the field. You're looking down onto the base of a corrugated pipe. You can see the little flow meter is being held just above the water surface. And that's typical of the sort of base flows that we get in the Pullman pipes. One of the other components that you need when you take a flow measurement is the dimensions of the flow. And one of the things that we noticed was that actually is a pretty good indicator to say what the flow is. And on that basis, what I'm saying here is that the stream width is actually a good flow indicator regardless of everything else. To measure the width, it's a lot more precise than the depth. A lot of people like to measure the depth. It's actually meaningless. As long as you've got a reasonably circular pipe, you can imagine that if you have a sliver of a flow on the bottom, that when you take the depth measurement, you've got a small number. When you take the width measurement, which you're doing from a distance, from outside the pipe, looking down, you've got a much larger number to work with. And so when the flow changes, when it rises, the depth has changed a little bit, the width has actually changed quite a lot. So you actually get more precise numbers if you use a width measurement rather than a depth measurement, as long as the pipe is reasonably circular. So that's you see those horizontal arrows there indicating the change in width with a small change in depth. To get precise numbers from a photograph, you can use a free piece of software called ImageJ. It's available from NIH. And what it will allow you to do is take your photograph and then you can draw lines on it, as shown here is that reddish bar over the flow meter. I know the width of the orange bar on the flow meter, so drawing a bar on top of the photograph says it goes from this pixel to that pixel. And because you know the width of the bar on the flow meter, you can say that distance is equivalent to 124 millimeters or whatever. So you can then compare that with the width of the flow that's present in the pipe. So now you have very precise width measurements, and again, no confined space entry. which is one of the real no-nos. So that's the way of getting information back out of your photographs at a later stage. I mentioned that the width was a good indicator of flow. When all the numbers were collected, we had the flow measurements measured on the device, calibrated unit, and we had the width measurements in the pipe, and applied some standard hydraulics theory to what you might expect for a particular slopes. The theory seemed to match up quite well with the flow measurements, the actual physical flows. And so what this graph is showing us here is, of the 5 places where we took regular width and flow measurements, there was a certain consistent behavior pattern amongst those data points. What that means is that once you know how quickly the water flows for a particular width, all you need to know in future is you just need that photograph, and you should be able to go directly back to a velocity measurement. And that consistent behavior will fit in with standard theory. Unfortunately, corrugated pipes are not properly described in standard theory, but using modifications and reinterpretations and stuff, we were able to find how corrugated pipes actually do behave. That's another story. So the other thing is, another no-brainer, telling you what you already know, is stream trajectory for velocity measurements. If you have a look at these 2 photographs taken a couple of hours apart in one of the early parts of the study, you'll notice that the water on the right is traveling, there's a lot more water, and it's also traveling a little bit further before it hits the base of the stream, which is the creek here, which has risen a bit too. In other words, the water that's traveling fast will travel further before it hits the ground. Based on standard physics, you know what that shape's going to look like. So if you were to print out this type of diagram on a transparent sheet and hold it up next to your pipe, you should be able to say, this is how quickly the water is coming out. And if you have a look at this photograph, you'll notice that the water in the center of the stream, which is where it travels fastest, has traveled furthest. Just a confirmation to say, visually, if you have a photograph of that pipe, you might be able to actually say how quickly it was flowing. There's a reference shape in the background, a 1 foot by 1 foot square. You don't absolutely have to have that. If you have the pipe dimension, and you know the pipe dimension, you already have a reference bar in the picture, which is the pipe dimension itself. That's a 36-inch pipe there. The other way of doing approximate flow measurements is to use temperatures. And that is, it's a method we've used quite a bit. This is the sort of thing that would be used. This is a data logger, Onset. It's made by Onset Data. Hobo, you're familiar with some of their other products. What makes this one different is it has an external thermocouple, which will trail in the water inside a manhole. So you can attach this to manhole steps, and there is a way of doing it without entering the manhole. You can attach this end to the manhole steps and then trail the tip in the water, and it'll pick up fluctuations in temperature. It's very, very sensitive, and it's very quick to react because it's exposed like this. There are a few modifications to be made. Obviously, it has to have duct tape, otherwise it's not official. So that's one of the things that has to happen. But this is the model that's worked very well for the work that we've done. It can be installed in a couple of different ways. What you see there is just attached to the grating. In one picture, there's another one which has a Y-frame, which we lower in, we pull on a piece of string, and it opens out these legs and stays in position. Don't try that with a sanitary sewer. And then there's the computer downloading the information off the optical top of this. You can buy rubber covers, or you can make your own. This is the cheaper version. Yeah, so there are lots of things that you can do to capture information. And to test its sensitivity, what we did was added a bit of hot water to the start of a storm system quite some distance from the points where we were monitoring. This is the sort of thing you'll find. Bottom line is the red line is the start of the system. You can see 2 pulses there because we did the experiment twice that day. You put in a plug of warm water, and then further down the system, about half a mile away from the initial water, you have a blip, a temperature blip further down the system, and then further down still, there's a slight distortion of the discharge point. And so what that said is if you put in a small plug of water, you can detect it further down the system. And this was in the middle of winter, you could see the snow in that picture earlier. So it is very sensitive and it can give you a lot of information. Obviously the time it takes to go between 2 points is an indication of velocity. One caution is you're looking at the velocity of the temperature, not necessarily the flow. The temperature is a proxy for flow. So just to recap what we've seen here, going through this process with Pullman, we encountered several things that we hadn't anticipated. Lots of new situations, school hard knocks, and there are lots of different ways of solving these problems. The challenge is to find one that works best for you. There isn't a standard protocol here. Find your best fit, and then if you do something that's unorthodox or slightly off the beaten track, document it well and provide that documentation to Department of Ecology, and everybody gets that sort of warm feeling of security. That's got to be one of the parts of any alternative testing. You can't just plunge in with something that's unproven. Obviously the target here was to find something that was really cheap and yet effective, and I think go through several different stages of insights in these projects, but we've actually, I think, ended up with something that's quite precise, quite accurate, gets the information can get it quite quickly. Use that information, your informal information, to target the problems. You then have a bit more budget left over to deal with the problems, and then you use the expensive type standard testing to measure how good you are once those problems have been corrected. And ideally, go away and do this for yourself, and then share the insights at next year's meeting. That'll be another interesting one. And with the acknowledgements, I always like to acknowledge my wife, Kelly Brayton, who puts up with this, and obviously the City of Pullman for sticking their necks out and trying these different approaches.
All right, next up, we have the sweet smell of success, finding and eliminating illicit connections in Seattle, and Adam Bailey will be presenting. Thank you, Adam.
So my name is Adam Bailey. Like Rachel said, I am the IDDE lead for the City of Seattle. And so our program is really good at finding cross connections, illicit connections, okay at finding discharges. I recently had twins, and I'm really good at finding illicit discharges. I think of that term very differently now. Sorry, that was right after lunch. Anyway. So the presentation overview, I'm going to talk about our program, the parameters that we use, and the trigger levels that we use. The trigger level is basically a parameter that's elevated for a specific number that triggers an investigation for us. I'm also going to talk about some of the tools that we use when we actually start investigating sources. The data collection and capture, we use ArcMap and GIS to do that. And then our compliance process, and how streamlined that is, and how that makes our jobs much, much easier when you have a streamlined process. So I'm just going to kind of touch on that because I think what's more interesting is kind of what we find in the field and some of the things that we found. So I'm going to focus on our biggest discovery, which was the New Holly development in South Seattle, which was a development with 49 cross connections. And I'm also going to talk about some of the challenging cases that we have. One in particular was a low-income homeowner, again in South Seattle, who was unable to pay for a repair, and kind of what happened with that. And so as you all know, Department of Ecology requires us all to have a stormwater management program, which the IDDE program is a part of. And so in Seattle, we screen 12% of the system on an annual basis, and that's about 4,000 acres, which is a lot of area to screen. We were required to prioritize our drainage basins, and we did that based on a number of criteria. Size of the basin, where the outfall was in relation to a public swimming beach, whether or not the basin had a water body listed for bacteria for a TMDL or for a 303 units water body, and then also parts of the City of Seattle used to be combined systems, so the stormwater and the sewer went to one pipe and then it was treated at a treatment plant. It's very expensive to do that, and so in the 60s and 70s, we separated a lot of the city, and when they did that, they made quite a bit of mistakes, so that was thrown into the red sheet as well. And then we're also required to develop an ordinance, which you guys are all required to do this too if you're a Phase 1 or Phase 2. that states cross connection or illicit connections or discharges are in violation of city code. And then we also track and maintain all those records. And so we have one full-time employee with the City of Seattle, that's me, and then every summer we hire a temporary employee, and that person works with us May through September, dry weather screening. Any investigations that we get that we don't finish in the summertime, we'll follow up in the fall and winter. So our program is year-round, it's not just in the summertime. We look into approximately 20 investigations a year, 20 to 25, and a handful of those lead us to a cross-connection or illicit discharge. And so outfall sampling is something that a lot of you, it's required as a permit, and a lot of people do that. In the City of Seattle, just because it's such a urbanized area, we don't think it works very well, so we do something that we call intensive sampling. So we'll go to a basin, we'll look at strategic points in the basin, and we'll sample a lot of different points in that basin to get a good idea of what's going on. We figure if you sample the outfall in a big basin, it's going to be so diluted it's not going to tell you anything. And so we try to really get a good idea of what's going on in the basin by taking many, many different samples. The way we screen a basin is, so we'll come to a maintenance hole, we'll open the maintenance hole, look for flow. If we have flow, we'll take a sample, and we can analyze that sample for a number of things right in the field. We'll look at surfactants, conductivity, pH, temperature, odor, and then visual observations, so things like floatables or color. And then we're also submitting some samples to our laboratory. Mainly we submit for fecal coliform bacteria, which is a really good indicator. We also submit for potassium and fluoride. Turnaround time on bacteria is 2 days for us, which is great. We can source trace really, really quickly if we need to. Potassium and fluoride takes about a week. And then we're running ammonia every day as well. So if we get a trigger level, which is an elevated number for any of these parameters, we begin an investigation. And so what we do is we start source tracing up the system. So we'll go to the next maintenance hole, hold that maintenance hole, and take another sample. Then we'll also notify ecology and let them know that we found something in our system that might not, or that shouldn't be there. We're working on figuring out what it is. So each one of these red dots on here is the sampling point. And each one, it's really nice in the City of Seattle because everything's been mapped, and so each one of these red dots is on a maintenance hole that already has GPS points associated with it. And so when we go out, we don't have to take GPS coordinates. We can just put a point right on the map. And so we use ArcMap on our field laptops. We use a geodatabase, and when we open a maintenance hole, we take a sample, we put a point on that maintenance hole, and the associated data is right here with it. It makes source tracing really easily when you can see things spatially like this. So when we start an investigation, we have a number of tools that we use. CCTV is by far the most effective tool that we have, and so what we're doing is we're sending a camera up the line, looking for suspect side sewers, so sewage coming from a side sewer or staining. When we do find that, we can use dye testing. CCTV it's great and it works really well, but it takes some time to coordinate with crews and it's kind of expensive to do, and so we do that as a last resort. If we can dye test, if we're near a business or a home that we think is cross-connected, we can go into that home, get permission to enter and do some dye testing, and basically what we're doing is we're putting a colored dye in the toilet or the sink and we're looking for it out in the storm system. And it's very cheap and easy to do, and so we try to do that as much as we can. Sometimes neither of those things will work, or maybe you have an idea that you might have a cross connection, but it's way down in the system and CCTV isn't going to work. Dye testing, there's too many homes to do. What we've invented is what we call a solid sampler or a crab trap. And basically it's just a pipe with a screen on the end of it, and we stick it in our maintenance hole. One day we'll come back a couple days later and monitor it for sewage. And it's a super cheap way to figure out if something's going on. If there is something going on, we can go back and sample more, or move it further up the system to determine where that's at. So CCTV is good for medium scale, dye testing is good for smaller scale. Smoke testing is great for large scale projects. I'm going to go into this a little bit more later in the presentation, but if you know you have many sources and dye testing isn't going to work for you, or CCTV isn't going to work for you, smoke testing gets really good results and it's pretty fast and cheap to do. We also use data loggers in unique situations. Last summer we had a situation where there was a washing machine that we thought was sporadically discharging to the storm system, so we could never catch it. So we went out there and put data loggers in, monitored for temperature, and it was really helpful. It told us what we wanted to know, that there was something going on there. It's pretty cheap to do as well. And then we also do some situational specific sampling. So we'll sample for things like cholesterol or caffeine. And so when we do find cross connections, we have a very defined process that we use. We'll notify the homeowner or the business and let them know that they need to limit use or stop use. We're also, right away, we're asking ourselves, do we need to install a pump and bypass? And what that is we're pumping the sewage from the storm system over to the sanitary system. It's very expensive to do that. And sometimes the sanitary system doesn't have capacity, and so we can't do it all the time. And so we've come up with a decision tree to kind of let us know when we need to do that. And basically, we're looking at 4 things. We're looking at volume. So if we have a large discharge, we're going to pump and bypass. We're looking at the type of discharge. And then we're looking at how far away we are from the outfall. If we're close to the outfall, we're going to pump and bypass. And then we're looking to see how close we are to a public swimming beach. And if we're near a public swimming beach, we obviously are going to sample the beach. We'll work with King County Public Health to do that. If results come back elevated, we'll close the beach. We'll work with our Parks Department and our Public Information Officer to get the word out to the public. And then sample the beach on consecutive days to see if it's safe to swim. At the same time while this is going on, we're sending out notice of violation letters to responsible parties, basically giving them 15 to 30 days to have the repair made, to let them know they need to do that. We note the code language or the code language in our letter that states that cross connections are a violation of city code. We also do not give them a penalty if they have the repair made in a timely manner. It's a suspended penalty. And what I think is really helpful in this letter is we have language in here that says if you don't do this, the city's going to do it, and we're going to charge you for it. And we all know how effective the city is at fixing things or keeping the price down, right? So we've actually never had to do this. We've never had to go in and fix somebody's cross connection. And so we work with responsible parties on a regular basis, and the main thing that I always say is we really have to have empathy. You're coming to someone and you're telling them that they have a huge problem. First of all, they're horrified that their sewage might be going somewhere to a public swimming beach or to a waterway. And secondly, you're telling them they have to fix it when these people have no idea how to do that. And so we really try to educate them and be a resource for them. We try to put them in contact with organizations that could give them low-income home loans to have the repair made. And then we're also bringing translators out if their English isn't their first language to work with them, and sending letters to them in their language. And then if they are fixing or if they are working to have the repair made, we will extend the deadline, and we can do that, 30 to 60 days to make sure that they're getting the repair made.
So you said you said something about loans?
Yeah, there are low-income home loans for people that have these situations, and there are organizations that will help them secure them if they have these good enough credit. And so we try to put them in contact with those organizations. So since 2009, we've discovered just over 100 cross connections. The north end here, you see that we don't find nearly as many, just because it's probably it's less urbanized up there, and I really think that we find them in urbanized areas for obvious reasons. And so we're almost done screening our city. We're 98% done. And I think when we go back and look at our prioritization, that we'll probably add urban density into that and see where that takes us. And so now I want to talk about a specific case that we worked on, the New Holly case. New Holly is a development in South Seattle where we found 49 cross connections, all with discharge down to Pritchard Beach, which is a public swimming beach kind of near Seward Park. So there were over 1,000 homes there. The majority of the homes are owned by Seattle Housing Authority. Very diverse neighborhood. I think when we translated letters there, we translated it into 8 different languages. And so it made working with the homeowners there kind of difficult. Kind of how we found this, I'll kind of take you through the first sample to when we found all we made the repairs. So our water quality investigator responded to a complaint of a broken side sewer near the beach. So we conducted a dye test after it was fixed, and we were looking for dye in the storm system right near the outfall. Didn't see dye, but what we saw was some suspect things. We saw a condom, which you can kind of see right here, a Q-tip and dental floss, which are things that you wouldn't necessarily not see in stormwater. But we thought we would take a sample just to be sure. Again, this is a huge basin, 1,500 acres, so sampling at the outfall, we didn't think was going to tell us a whole lot. We did it anyway. We got semi-elevated results, and so we decided to screen this basin for IDDE. Very daunting task, again, 1,500 acre basin, highly urbanized area. made difficult. Traffic control was a huge issue there. Rainier Avenue South runs through this basin, so we were having to sample a lot on Rainier Avenue South. Closing lanes. We were also having to enter manholes because a lot of the manholes were offset or really deep, and so we're having to use confined space entry equipment to do that, which was very time consuming. And then a lot of times we'd open a maintenance hole and we would have 3 inflows into the maintenance hole, and each one of the inflows would have a trigger for bacteria. And so it's kind of like, where do you go? You know, do you go? So we decided, well, let's look at the highest levels of bacteria first. We'll show the other investigations and we'll come back to those next year when we have more time to do that. So we started screening, but we were all said and done. These are all the points that we took in that basin. We looked at over 100 maintenance holes. This is Rainier Avenue South here. You can see a lot of that sampling took place along Rainier Avenue South. And so that was the path that led us to New Holly, that blue line right there. Just about 2.5 miles. Took 75 samples, about a month and a half to locate New Holly. And then all those investigations, the additional ones that we discovered when we were screening, led to 8 additional cross connections. And so when we got to New Holly, our bacteria levels led us right up to New Holly. So I went into the development and I opened the first maintenance hole, and there's sewage in the maintenance hole. And I was like, oh, this is easy. Go digest a couple homes, and this was our source. And so we digested some homes. We found right off the bat there were 3 cross connections. And so I went back to the office, started the NOV process, went back out a couple days later, started opening more maintenance holes in the development, and I started seeing sewage in all the maintenance holes. And I thought to myself, I've been screening the sanitary sewer system this whole time. I really did think that, and so I made sure that I hadn't been doing that. And I hadn't been doing that, thank goodness. And so right away, met with supervisors and managers and said, I think we have a huge problem out here. What are we going to do about this? And so we kind of came up with a strategy. We decided that we would CCTV the whole development right away, just to kind of get a rough idea of where the cross connections were. And then at the same time, we said, well, there's a lot of sewage going down to a swimming beach. Maybe we should let field operations know when they can start working on the bypass. And so they installed a permanent bypass at the outlet of this development, which was great. And then we were sampling the beach. And luckily, when we sampled the beach, the results came back pretty low, which is surprising. But the outfall jetted about 400 feet out into Lake Washington. So I think it was just kind of being pushed out into Lake Washington. It wasn't coming back into the swimming area. But we did monitor that swimming beach the whole time we were doing this. So we CCTV'd the whole development, and we came back with 13 cross connections. And each one of those cross connections served multiple homes, so each cross connection would serve 2, 3, 4 homes. And so we said, that's great, we have a really good idea of what's going on here, but we really need to figure out where they are exactly, and how do you do that? Do you dye test every single house? There's over 1,000 homes in this development. Again, the language barriers, I mean, you would go to a home and someone wouldn't understand you. So trying to coordinate getting into someone's home, and it was going to be very timely and costly, and we said that's not going to work. And so we were kind of throwing around ideas, and smoke testing came up. So we looked into it, realized you can do it really fast, very quick. It's very inexpensive to do. You can do it in large-scale developments like this. It works really well, and you get pretty good results. And so that's what we did. So again, cheap, fast, you get good results, could be done on a large scale. As you can imagine, the notifications are crazy for something like this. You know, you're going to blow smoke into a development in South Seattle, and people are going to notice. And so we notified the fire department, the police department, King County Metro, the school district, and the news organizations. And they actually ran a story on this, which was great. So they kind of got the word out. I'll show you what it looks like here. So what they're doing, what he's doing here is this is a smoke machine, they call it, and he's got an engine on this, and he's dropping a mineral oil on the exhaust, and it blows smoke up the storm system. And if you have a cross connection, you're going to see smoke come out the sewer vent on the house. And so it gives you really good results. And so you can imagine, 50 homes doing that in South Seattle. And the one thing, you can notify people. So we notified homeowners 2 weeks, a week, and a day in advance of doing this, and we thought we got everybody. And we were telling people, put water in your P-trap, because if you don't, smoke might come into your home. And so the one place that we didn't notify, they didn't get a letter, it was a dentist office that was like to capacity that day. You just see smoke pour to the dentist office, and people pour out of the dentist office. And I'm there with the hat on, right? And I'm sitting there looking at the people, and they're just kind of like, what's going on? And so lesson is, something will happen. Someone will get smoke in their home. So that gave us really good results. When it was all said and done, these were all the cross connections in that development. really no rhyme or reason to where they were, which is kind of interesting. What we did is we dye tested each one of these homes just to confirm that it was cross-connected. And then we had some conflicting results on some other homes, and we dye tested those as well. So really successful, I think, project for this.
How old is that neighborhood?
The neighborhood, I believe, was built in the 90s. So it had been going on for a while. And so the next question became, well, how do you deal with all these cross connections? Do you send each homeowner a letter that says you have to fix your cross connection, or are they going to try to coordinate with each other? That wasn't going to work. Do you send the homeowners association a letter and let them know that they've got to take care of this? We got very lucky because Seattle Housing Authority owned the majority of the homes, and we could send them one letter that said you have an issue. And they had enough clout to go after the construction company that performed the work after construction. And they fixed they made all the repairs on their own dime, and it cost them about $300,000 to do that, which was relatively cheap because they could make a lot of these repairs on the property line. If they had to go out into the street and start making these repairs, it would have been way more costly. It took them about 2 months to do it. And so the question that everyone asks is, how could that happen? You know, how does this sort of thing happen? And I think the consensus was when they build these large developments, they put the street in, they put the storm and the sanitary lines in the street, and they stub out from each line to an empty lot. And the way they mark the storm and the sanitary is they put a stake in the ground in each one. So all that has to happen is someone to come and switch the stakes. And unless you're dye testing, you would never know which one is which. And so that was a problem. And so we worked with the Department of Planning and Development to kind of come up with a way to have this not happen again. And so the solution was for these large-scale developments like this, before DPD or Department of Planning and Development signs off on the permit, they require that the construction company dye tests all the homes. So they do that now. And so we went to all the Seattle Housing Authority projects after we discovered this, and the next one we found was called Rainier Vista. We found 6 more cross connections on that one, but all the other ones were fine. Again, I think another reason people thought this happened was they were building during the boom time, and I think a lot of contractors out there were doing business when they probably shouldn't have been doing the business. So these were the additional discoveries that we found in that basin. The following year, we went back out and screened again, or finished screening the basin, and so we found 8 additional discoveries here. The majority of them were single-family homes.
Same contractor?
So that was a successful case. We've also had some challenging cases. So in South Seattle, again, in 2011, we discovered a cross connection from a single-family home discharged to Lake Washington, kind of near Beersheba Park. And the homeowner right away said, I'm not going to be able to make this repair. And so we knew this was going to happen eventually. Not everybody has the money to do this. It can cost from anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000, depending on whether you have to go out to the street. And she said, I can't do this. And so we actually really did work with her to try to get her resources to get a loan, but her credit just wasn't good enough, and she couldn't secure a loan. And so we really didn't want to, but we did. We were going to have to go and make the repair ourselves, and then we were going to have to put a lien against her home to try to get cost recovery once the home sold. But Somewhat the city had a brilliant idea, and I'm going to run the story that they ran. They contacted the Como Forest problem solver, and they heard a story. There's a lot of crying in this.
A simple drop of colored dye in the toilet has morphed into a 6-month nightmare for a local family that's now faced with thousands of dollars in repairs.
They contacted consumer problem solver Connie Thompson to help spread the word about a little-known law that could find many of you in a similar situation. Connie?
Right, Mary Dan, if you own a home, especially in Seattle, the sewer pipe running from your house to the street is your financial responsibility, even if a plumber made a sewer connection mistake.
Well, Poppy cried, and I want to, but it's very nerve-wracking.
77-year-old Geraldine Burnett is in a pickle. She and her family must come up with thousands of dollars to dig up the sewer pipe in their driveway.
So here's what they're going to do to do the work.
Turns out the underground side sewer, marked here in green, is not properly connected.
Someone goofed up a long time ago.
Here's the problem. The side sewer is the pipe that runs from your home and connects to the city's main sewer pipe in the street. The city system carries everything to the sewage treatment plant. But in the Burnett's case, the side sewer was connected to the city's storm drain, which leads to the nearest body of water. For more than half a century, every turn of the faucet and every toilet flush has sent wastewater through the city storm drain and into the lake.
And down the hill, and out to Lake Washington.
Records show a city inspector approved the side sewer connection in 1967, years before the Brunettes bought the house. But like most people, the Brunettes didn't know that property owners are responsible for virtually all side sewer repairs.
So as a property owner, it is your responsibility.
Seattle Public Utilities says state regulators require cities to find water pollution and stop it.
If the property owner cannot get funds to do the fix, the city is obligated to make the correction and then try and get reimbursed at some point in time from the property owner.
Which means if Geraldine can't pay for the fix,
I've tried to get the money and we can't get the loan.
she faces a lien on her property until she can reimburse the city.
Seattle says it finds about 100 side sewer problems a year, pipes that are either misconnected or broken. But side sewer responsibility is not just a Seattle issue. Virtually every city has a similar ordinance on the books, something we all need to pay attention to the problem. Thank you, Roger.
So that was the initial story they ran.
Pretty good explanation.
Yeah, it was. No, sure.
When she talked to Consumer Problems Harvey County Thompson last week, 77-year-old Geraldine Brunette of Seattle faced a potential lien on her home because of a bad sewer line connection.
Connie says today, Geraldine has found a sewer pipe solution thanks to a special stranger who saw her story. Connie?
Talk about being between a rock and a hard place, Mary and Dan. First, Geraldine learns her sewer line is connected to the city's storm drain, not her fault. Then she learns city ordinance holds the homeowner responsible for any repairs, in this case, thousands of dollars Geraldine doesn't have. But I got a call from someone with extra motivation to help out.
Chapman Excavation was the first of several local contractors to contact the problem solvers and offer to help Geraldine dig her way out of the mess. Chris Chapman said his crew saw my report about Geraldine's predicament, and so did Chris's mother.
Well, my mother contacted me and told me to turn on a couple floors.
Chapman's mother encouraged him. So he did.
Just a ton lifted off of our chest of worry.
Geraldine is beyond grateful. She's relieved her sewage is no longer draining into the beautiful lake.
There's a place in heaven for him, for helping us.
Chapman told me he thinks of his mom in Geraldine's position. He's glad to help.
In this economy, people don't really have $6,000, $10,000, $12,000 just sitting around to spend on something that you're not going to look at.
Well, I was glad that his mother knew and called her son.
Within a matter of hours, Geraldine's sewer line was reconnected to the actual sewer. No more pollution, no more stress. Geraldine says she'll never forget Chapman for paying it forward, and she'll never forget his mom.
I've got a card that I'm going to send her. I'm going to get her address, and I'm going to write her a little card, a thank you note for it.
The crew says in a couple of days they'll have the driveway patched up and the sewer line connected where the sewer line should be.
Chapman and his crew are doing that work for free. Geraldine says when you do good, it comes back to you, and she's confident Chris Chapman's generosity will come back to him. And she also thanks the other companies who called us offering to help her. What a great story. What's
Love
nice
that
thing?
story. That's sweet.
Great story. So it really is only a matter of time before, Connie doesn't get involved and fix that for that low-income homeowner. But so I came up with a flow chart for how this, any problem you have in life, I don't think Jesse's working right now, so you just have to get phone. But I think another kind of thing that I learned during this whole process is when you see the media come, you kind of run the other way. I know I do, but sometimes they can actually help you, which thank goodness someone at the city realized that. So takeaways from the presentation, I realized the city of Seattle, we have a lot of money to do this kind of work, and I used to work for a small municipality where we didn't have money, and one person did 5 things. But I don't think if you want to find things in your city or your county, I don't think it takes a lot of money to do that. I think you could use inexpensive techniques like the solid sampler or the crab trap. You put it in a maintenance hole and you monitor it for a couple of days, and if you have sewage, you have a problem. Maybe you can spend some time dye testing or doing something else. Another thing I think, the city of Seattle is all a little bit different because we're not rural, we're highly urbanized, and so I think, outfall monitoring doesn't work for us, but I think anytime you're in the city, if you're going to sample in an urbanized area, you should take a lot of samples in the city and maybe just use 1 or 2 parameters because it's going to give you a much better idea of what's going on. Taking a sample at an outfall, if there's a lot of flow, it's going to give you diluted numbers and it's probably not going to tell you much of what's going on high up in the basin. And also smoke testing, if you do realize you have problems in a development or something, smoke testing is actually really cheap and easy to do. I think people get overwhelmed thinking about it, but it's just making notifications and doing the work, and there are companies out there that do it and they do it cheaply. And then the other thing I would say is use your code language. Everyone has code language to get compliance. And if you are working with homeowners or businesses to try to gain compliance, I would stress to work with them as opposed to going in there and being combative, because it really doesn't work to do that. And again, people don't realize a lot of the times that they have issues going on in their lives. So that's it. That's all I have.